Hello crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I'm here to share a card featuring Gerda Steiner Designs, and I'm going to be starting with her Snowman Friends stamp set, some distressed specialty stamping paper, and a stencil from Create a Smile called Lots of Mugs. I know that we are past Christmas and some people think, oh, it's time to put away all of the winter snowman stamps, that sort of thing, but for many of us, winter is just beginning. In fact, we haven't even had any snow where I'm from. We're probably going to get a lot in January and February, so I thought it'd be fun to make a winter card, and also I'll be part of a swap with some other coffee-loving paper crafters from a Facebook group, and so I'm going to be making a card for one of them today. So to get started, I wanted to tape down my stencil so that it would be really secure, and I also taped down my paper to my Ranger craft sheet here because I don't want it to move about. This is a pretty thin lined stencil, and so it's going to be important that it is secured down well and that I think about that as I apply the distress ink. You could easily lift up these thin lines of the stencil and not get those crisp impressions. So as I apply the distress ink, I'm going to be doing more of a dab motion than a typical blending sort of rubbing motion onto the stenciled area. If you rub, you're going to catch the edges of the stencil and not get those crisp impressions. And in fact, here where I started, I actually had a little bit too much ink and kind of got some splatters under the stencil. So you're going to have to be a little bit careful because of that. I'm also using the specialty stamping paper from Ranger. They have recently repackaged it as distressed specialty stamping paper, but as far as I understand, it's the same stamping paper, specialty stamping paper Ranger's always sold, just kind of brought to a new audience with a new packaging there. But what's interesting about the specialty stamping paper is that it has this sort of slightly glossy surface, which is kind of cool because it really shows you the texture of the mediums that you're using, and it means that your ink sits a little bit more on top of the paper, which is what gives it that crisper impression and gives you a little bit better of a trueness to what you're stamping. However, because the ink is sitting on top of the paper, it blends in a different way, and it's something that you have to definitely get used to. The colors aren't sinking right into the paper, and so when you blend the cracked pistachio into the peacock feathers, for example, you're going to lose both colors and instead get a new color. So if you don't want that to happen, if you want some of the areas to stay in the cracked pistachio color, don't go over with the other color because they're going to blend a lot more with this kind of paper than they would with the average paper. And I thought that that is a fun property because sometimes I do want to find a new color. I don't want it to look like cracked pistachios sitting next to peacock feathers, but instead bring them together and create a new color. So that's a fun reason to use the distressed specialty stamping paper. And so once I've dabbed on a variety of the inks, and I used, as I mentioned, cracked pistachio, peacock feathers, but the darkest blue there is the Mermaid Lagoon. And I just wanted to create a background in some soft winter colors, sort of winter sky look. And I tried to leave some areas considerably lighter because, again, of that sky look of that, wispy clouds sort of thing. And now I have my snowman stamped onto a piece of 110-pound Recollections cardstock with the My Favorite Things Black Licorice Hybrid ink. I like that ink because it works with all mediums. It's waterproof and also Copic friendly. And I know there's a couple other options out there like that, but it's my personal favorite and I've had a lot of success with it. So I'm coloring with Prismacolor pencils. And I recently got the 48 pack of pencils on an amazing Black Friday deal, but it didn't contain any grays, which was a big downer for me because I color a lot of critters and you're going to need those gray colors. But also even here for a snowman, you think he's white, you don't have to color him at all. But actually, if you add a little bit of gray, he'll appear more white and have more depth and dimension. And so I'm using the two lightest of the warm grays available. And then I will be, so what I started with doing was laying the lightest, which I believe is a 10% warm gray, is how they label the grays in percentages. And I came from the side, so the shadows would be on the side and he would appear rounded. And I just sort of flicked in the pencil because I knew I would be fussy cutting it, so if there's any on the outside, that's not a big deal at all. And I then layered the darker color on top of that, and I blended it out with the white. With the Prismacolor pencils, the Prismacolor pencils, I prefer to blend with a lighter color. So rather than taking a special blending tool, I will take a light blue to blend in a blue color. And in this case, with the grays, I use the white. I'm also here coloring the scarf, and I left this in because when you're coloring clothing, you have to think about where the folds are, and sometimes the stamp artist has given you indications of where that would be, as it kind of like comes over his arm and creates a little fold, or where the scarf is being wrapped around itself. It sort of creates those natural shadows for you. And I'm doing the same technique where I lay a little bit of the lightest color on, and when I'm putting the lightest color, when I'm putting my first coat of colored pencil, I keep the pressure really light. But as I develop where I think the shadows are going to be, I start putting a little bit more pressure on and start to help darken the color, as well as using a slightly darker color, and then blend it out with the lightest color again. I find that if you want to create that high contrast look, one of the best things to do is in the end to come back with your very darkest color that you feel comfortable using and sort of just trace the edges of everywhere that there was a shadow. And that will help really deepen those shadows and make them more dramatic and give a little bit more life to whatever you're coloring. I wanted to make sure that the hat didn't appear so much like a Santa hat. I think that's one thing that people might say, oh, this is a Christmas set because he's wearing a Santa hat. However, if you do the coloring right, it becomes less noticeable that it's a Santa hat. You know, don't color it red and white. And so I'm adding color all over the hat, and I find myself leaning towards the teals and purples a lot with winter cards, and so I've fallen into the trap again, and here I am with the teal and purple using that same technique. With the colored pencils though, you can see a lot of the texture. They don't blend out as much as the Copic markers, which is kind of a good thing because it can help you to create that look of like a furry hat, or in this case the furry brim of the hat. And so you can really see the pencil lines and choose to keep them and not blend them out as much. So I decided to mount my snowman on a stitched circle panel. The background was cut out of a stitched rectangle, and I like just pulling in that little detail on the edge of everything. And I popped him up on some foam dots and added this sentiment from Lawn Fawn that says warm winter wishes, since we still have plenty of winter left. And for a final detail, because I thought that there was a lot of blank space left here on this white panel, I am adding some of these enamel shapes from Create a Smile stamps. I really like their enamel shapes because you get a whole variety of them inside of a single pack. So instead of just getting dots in various sizes, you get some arrows and some sort of like raindrop shapes and that sort of thing. And so they're just a little bit more interesting. I particularly like the arrows to bring attention to the sentiment, and I find myself using them in that way a lot. And once I had one pack and realized how much I was using them, I just ordered all the different colors so that I would have something ready to match up with any card. And you see they have those larger and smaller arrows. And I'm just sort of applying that rule of odds where I'm trying to, I used 3 of the dots in a visual triangle, but then with the arrows, since they're doing more, they have sort of they obviously direct your attention naturally in their shape. You don't have to worry so much about that visual triangle thing. But I'm just kind of trying to balance it all out here. And once I have those enamel dots in place, that's going to be it for my card today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're interested in more crafting tutorials, you can subscribe to my channel. I have a lot of fun things planned this month, including the Newton Snook Designs Valentine's release. I will leave you a link to the Gerda Steiner Designs shop and blog in the video description below, so you can check that out. But I'll also leave you a link to 2 different Facebook groups you might find interesting. The one where you can share your creations using Gerda Steiner Designs stamps, and also to my critter loving paper crafters group, because if you are interested in Gerda Steiner, you probably would love to share your creations there as well. So thanks for watching. Bye.